Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're so glad you're here, participants. We see you filtering in, and thank you so much for being with us today. My name's Brooke Steinhauser. I am the Senior Director of Programs at the Emily Dickinson Museum, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the second day of our Tell It Slant Poetry Festival at the museum. We're just so thrilled to be with you this whole week, bringing you all kinds of exciting programs with some of the most wonderful poets we know, two of whom you can see on the screen with me, and I'll be introducing them in just a moment. If you'd like, you could chime in the chat and tell us where you're coming from today. It's always fun to see where everybody is in the world. Hi, from Alaska and California, Indiana, Seattle, Maine. I see you, Springfield, Massachusetts. Worcester, yeah, Colorado, this is so great. And Canada, Canada's in the house. This is so fun. So we have an amazing workshop for you today with two poets who are going to look at some Dickinson poems as well as some contemporary work and use a helpful framework to objectively analyze poetry at the level of craft and technique. So we invite your participation through the chat space, but also through the Q&A function if you would like, which is usually found in your Zoom toolbar down at the bottom of your screen. There will be time to address questions as they come, so Mary and Lucas encourage you to put your questions either in the Q&A or in the chat at any time. We'll be together for about 90 minutes. So now it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's poets. Mary Robles is from El Paso, Texas. She's a recent graduate of Bowling Green State University MFA program, where she served as poetry editor for Mid-American Review. And her work has appeared in Agnes To Never Have Risked Our Lives, a portfolio of Central American and Mexican diaspora writing, and has been published or is forthcoming in the Adroit Journal, Copper Nickel, and Spoon River Poetry Review, among others. She's currently pursuing a PhD in English and Creative Writing at the University of Rhode Island, where she is a Dean's Fellow. And Lucas Clark is from a small farming community in Northeast Ohio. His poetry is mostly concerned with meditating in the experience of nature and relishing the love of close friendships. And you can probably find him out in the woods walking rain or shine, but today he's on Zoom. Thanks, Lucas. So happy to be here with you both, and over to you.
Likewise, thank you. Hi, everyone, and thank you, Brooke, so much for letting us present this workshop. Thank you, Lucas, for joining me. I know we're both really happy to be doing this. Lucas and I met at Bowling Green State University through the MFA program there, and we connected kind of over nature poetry, Dickinson in particular too. So I know we both have a lot to say and not a ton of time. So forgive me if I am over exuberant at any point. And I guess, well, I'll just maybe say, Lucas, did you want to add anything off the top?
Um, Not too much. I mean, all I would say is I think most of us already said I'm a poet, born, raised in Ohio, residing in Ohio, live on a 62-acre tree nursery. I devote every day to the practice of poetry, reading, writing it. And I'm just honored to be here. I think me and Mary have a lot of great methods for breaking down and talking about poems in a specific and concise manner. And I'm just happy that we're able to share the fruits of our experience at Bowling Green here. So thank you for showing up.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, whatever. Thanks
Yeah.
to the group. Thanks. It's a group effort. So I think I wanted to just start by saying that this kind of the idea for this workshop arose out of just feeling overwhelmed by the amount of text and the amount of approaches that you're exposed to, either as a beginning writer or kind of mid-level, like in your getting a BFA in creative writing, say, or in the MFA program. The amount of textbooks and voices and approaches just start flooding in, and I just started to think, I don't know where to begin with all of this. So in order to have something that I felt was worthwhile to bring to the workshop table, I came up with sort of like a boiled down cheat sheet, if you will, of some of these approaches. And that's essentially what this workshop is. So the idea is melding a lot of different resources. It's not comprehensive. I would say that I'm not an expert, so I'm wanting to become, and I'm striving to kind of learn and get there. But this is kind of the process. So this workshop is about that process. So we're looking at an objective approach, as Brooke said, that's centered on these formal craft elements. And so part of going through like the academic process is being exposed to a lot of like theory and a lot of different ways that literature is interpreted. And of course, these all have their place, but I do think that it can make people not know where they stand in terms of just like the nuts and bolts of their craft. So again, like the idea here was that you have an overall view, kind of like a bird's eye view of what is going on in a poem, and all of the different voices and texts fit in a place within like that structure. So we shared ahead of time some of our documents, which we'll refer to. And the main one is our poetry table, we're calling it. And this is kind of the main boiled down cheat sheet, if you will, that I was referring to, where it shows these 5 levels of a poem, and that's what we'll be talking about and using to assess everything we're doing. And then there's like a terminology list that's again not comprehensive. It's not, the penultimate list of poetic terminology. It's what Lucas and I have put together based on this, trying to get a handle on the bigger picture approach. So we'll look at some of those, and then we're going to look at a couple Dickinson poems, and like actively apply the poetry table to them to see how that works and to discuss her approach a bit. And then we have a Louise Glick poem that we'll look at, and then we'll also do a prompt, and we'll from there use the poetry table to look at what we've written. And there will be some flexibility and options for what you might want to do with that. So let me grab. I'll start screen sharing here so that you can see what I'm talking about. Okay, so this is our poetry table. And again, what we have are these like 5 levels. And so the first, like as you can see here, typographical level, and then it goes into 2 sonics, and we'll explain why we have 2 of those. Sensory ideational level. So like just off the top, if you're in a workshop or you're in a class, or even if you're just reading a poem in a magazine and someone asks you what you think of it, even for beginning writers and people who again are like in the MFA program, it's hard to know where to even start. And there are just so many like options for how you decide how you're going to discuss a piece of poetry. So for here, when that started to happen to me in class, I'd say, let's start first at typographical. Let's just see what it looks like on the page. What are we visually seeing? And so then the 3 bullets that you see here are referring to the types of stanzas, the types of line length, how the verses are set up, how the stanzas are set up, and then what kind of poem it might be. And by the way, if people have questions or anything, please feel free to chime in as we're going along with this. So one of the first things you'll notice when you look at a poem is like what form it's in. That's just sort of like the basic thing you'll see first. So even if you don't know like what these terms are, or you're highly familiar with them, you can start with that. If it's one big block of text, you can say, well, this is definitely not like, a haiku, or it's not like a sonnet or something like that. So you, as you come to know couplets are 2-line stanzas. So if you see a poem that's divided up into a bunch of 2-line stanzas, you're looking at some couplets. And then if it's a lot of contemporary poetry is written in just unregulated lines, so you can say that might be a free verse poem. You'll also come across what looks like a piece of prose, just like a paragraph. So then you can say that might be a prose poem. And so yeah, the verse paragraphs refer to the like organization of text in a poem. And again, like all of these terms are on our terminology list, which I'll also just jump to here so you can get a sense. So anything you want to find in here, I'd say probably like a search and find might be the best way, because we did get a little lengthy with this, but it is, you know, kind of just fleshing out some of these more boiled down things that are in the table. So in the interest of time, like I'm not going to like delve into say like I would in a workshop for instructing about specifics of each of these like terms, but this really is to help you see where these things fit. So like again, if we're starting at the first level here, typographical, you're looking at what form it's in, how it appears on the page, and then even special forms, which are really fun. Like I remember really liking in the MFA trying out different types of poetic forms, like ghazals or a sonnet, trying to write a Shakespearean sonnet. Like it's very interesting to try and learn the restrictions of the form, and then you start to identify them on the page too. And stuff like an elegy may not appear immediately in the typographical sense, but you can start to get an idea. And I should note too, we have some textbooks we can refer to as well. Like it's nice to have a little textbook that shows poetic forms so that you can start to learn like what they look like and then start to try them out. So Lucas, do you want to jump in and move to the next level?
For sure. So the second level, sonic level, rhythm and meter. Um, when most people mention rhythm and meter in a poetry class, the students start sweating a little bit. That's usually because we have a looser grasp of it today than most poets did growing up back in Emily Dickinson's time, because we live in a realm of free verse today. It's not as emphasized. So what I want to start out by talking about is in the 19th century, Emily Dickinson's time, most poets then and prior were concerned with accentual syllabic verse, meaning that they paid attention to stressed and unstressed syllables in the words of the poem. The stresses can vary in a line, but the syllable count usually does not vary. This is sort of the constraint that they were working within. Why would you do it? It's just naturally pleasing to your ear, is what I would say. I think that's mostly what it boils down to if you read Coleridge's analysis. Um, and most people struggle determining stressed and unstressed syllables. That's usually the biggest thing that we have to get over. And that's because you could use the same word in two different contexts, and the stress could fall on different syllables of that word, depending on the tone and the structure of the sentence. So there's not a one size fits all approach to accentual syllabic verse. So how would you do it? I have what I think works best for myself and most other people that I see really understand this type of verse. It's that if you think back to the 1800s, if you were a poet growing up in Emily Dickinson's time, let's say, think what you'd be reading. You'd be reading all poems that are written in accentual syllabic verse. You'd be reading iambic pentameter. You'd be reading trochaic, trimeter, anapestic, dactyls, all of it. It would be sort of ingrained into you. And so over time, it sort of becomes second nature. And so if you want to begin understanding accentual syllabic verse in those 19th century poets and prior, you need to begin by attuning your ear to that type of poetry. My advice is to pick a poet who's mastered it and just immerse yourself in those works. And what you want to do is you don't want to go through and mark the stressed, unstressed on every single line. You're going to torture yourself if you do that. You're never going to want to finish reading a book of poetry if you do that. What you want to do is you just want to listen to the music of the poem without worrying about if you're getting it right. Once you read enough of poets doing that, you'll be able to naturally do it and it'll appear in your own writing. Um, I just saw a comment that asked, can you give examples of those poets? Shakespeare, Milton, Emily Dickinson, Keats, Wordsworth, Coleridge, Elizabeth Bishop. There's so many poets that write, Robert Frost, especially, sensual syllabic verse. There's tons of poets that write it. You just have to find one that's mastered it. Male, female, all sorts. Everybody has somebody that's mastered that sensual syllabic verse. Yeah. Um, and so that's sort of just a quick rundown. If you want to get used to that, if you want to know how to study that, just immerse yourself in it and listen to it. Yeah, exactly. Robert Browning, Elizabeth Barrett Browning, two big ones. There's so many. Um, However, we live in a world of free verse. And so if you find yourself reading a free verse poem, you're not going to be scanning the way you would accentual syllabic verse. What you'll find is that the other sections of our poetry table will be much more emphasized and have much more complexity going on. Free verse isn't easier to write. It's just that you have to use other methods to create meaning and music line to line, such as line breaks and jamming, so on and so forth. Um, so on our stockpiles list of definitions and terms, there's a whole section that has all the terminology you'll need to put words to accentual syllabic or free verse, however you want. But I just wanted to give a quick overview of how you'd sort of approach learning how to do it. It's experiential, not intellectual. The more you experience it, the more you'll be able to do it, the more you'll be able to understand it. There's no musician that didn't hear music to be able to do it. So with that, I'll wrap up the rhythm and meter and send it back to Mary.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so I am actually going to, for the next level, use a couple PowerPoint slides that I have because I think it is helpful to see some of this visually. So let me grab what I'm doing. So yeah, so that gives us a sense of where in the table does rhythm and meter fit. So sonic level number 1. And so as you see, like there are 2 sonic levels because we're talking about the actual rhythm and meter of counts of syllables and that sort of thing. Then this is what things actually sound like. So different effects, how those make the poem land, and I'll get into it here. And again, in the interest of time, I won't spend a ton going through this, but this really just helps you get some of these terms. So alliteration is here in the table. So this is really something that we come across a lot. You'll come across a lot in writing poetry and reading it. Repetitions of consonants at the beginning of words, as in this poem, Pied Beauty by Gerard Manley Hopkins with swift, slow, sweet, sour, a dazzle, dim. So you hear those S's repeating. So these like devices are where in the big picture this fits. This little section about alliteration is kind of like a little joke. I don't like alliteration. We learned about it in school, but it's seriously, stupendously silly, definitely drastically difficult, terribly, troublingly tricky. So it's like a play on how annoying learning about alliteration can be. And so then alliteration includes assonance and consonants. And again, like the terms list we came up with is where you can track all this down if you don't know what these words mean or what these concepts are, and then you can see where they're fitting into this big picture. So in the sonics devices section, we're looking at assonants, which are vowels, have to do with repeating vowels, as in this example here, and shout into the ridges of the wind to hear that vowel repetition. And then consonants are the B's, or I mean the consonants refer to consonants being repeated, as you can see in this example. So then rhyme, of course, is the repetition of syllables at the end of a verse, usually at the end of a line of verse. And a big factor for Emily Dickinson is, of course, slant rhyme. And she was very much a master of that. And then a lot of contemporary poetry you'll come across is no rhyme. So I can, I'm sure we can make these slides like available if they're helpful for anyone, or we can say where we're getting all this from. But again, this is kind of just pulling together all of these different resources to get a sense of what these concepts are. So this talks a little bit more about slant rhyme. I rhyme is where they appear to rhyme, but actually don't, like love and rove. And again, here, like contemporary writing often does not have rhyming happening. And so stanza construction, I think, is really interesting. And when you think about the stanzas, like Lucas, I know you were mentioning recently, like in our preparing for this, you had noted that the stanza is like a room. And we can also think of it kind of as like a musical score where these parts go together as you present them. So how you construct and group your text together in a poem affects how it sounds, because those will be presumably read aloud as one section. And like music, this was an example of a term I just kept coming across, but I was not finding an actual definition. Like, what does it mean when we say music in a poem? So this is my kind of culmination of what I found. I see it to be a catch-all for these linguistic elements that affect what it sounds like. So that includes stuff like the rhythm, the tone, echoing of sounds. So it's kind of one of those more like nebulous terms, I think. Ezra Pound's The Apparition of These Faces in the Crowd, Petals on a Wet Black Bough. So those repetitions here are like echoing. And it's also like alliteration or consonants or assonance, I mean. And then of course, you can break down Shakespeare in all kinds of ways regarding this. Moving through it quickly though. Yeah, so some of the resources that we're using for this, we can make available. But that is kind of that's where the rhythm and meter like section differs off, like the counting of syllables into the actual devices that that are affecting the sound. And I think I'll just add too, like this is a really great resource too, on the Emily Dickinson Museum website, a major characteristic of Dickens poetry. So I can add that in the chat because that really helps tie in some of these things we're talking about, especially like what Lucas was describing with the meter. So I'll add that as well. And then I'll stop sharing.
Yeah. One other thing I wanted to point out there about the poetry table. Let me see if I can pull it back up. Hold on one sec. There we go. So just looking back at this poetry table here, see if it's sharing. The difference, the way that we organize this, the difference between the first sonic level and the second is that in the second level, the sense of sound, we're looking how words share sounds with one another, either through alliteration or consonants or assonants or rhymes, various types of rhymes. They actually share the sound. And usually there's a meaning that sort of connects the, like, why are these words sharing sounds in a poem? Does that mean anything? Something you can look at. Rhythm and meter, it's different. We're not sharing sounds, but there's a sort of a beat or it's a syllabic or so on and so forth. That's the difference between those two. But it's also why they share the same definition. It's two different types of sound. Is there anything else you wanted to add about the section, Mary?
No, that's great. Thank you.
Okay, I just wanted to offer that. Moving on here to the fourth level, the sensory level, figurative language. We'll start out here with imagery. Poets transfer a visual image and the experience of that visual image from their brain to yours. I pointed off that way. I meant to point this way. To yours through the power of words. And they use these images to engage and fix our attention. They can do this through sensory uh, capabilities by engaging your five senses to make you, physically feel an image, or they can use it associatively, playing on the psychological links that lead from image to image. You'll find that the images in a poem are usually utterly unique and can really only fit that poem. If a poet steals an image from a poem, I mean, if a poet steals an image from a poem and puts it in theirs, it won't feel right. It won't fit because each image that a poet makes is utterly idiosyncratic and will only work for their work. I truly believe that. And that's because a poetic image hits you on an emotional level before it ever touches you intellectually. It always goes straight to your heart and then it goes to your head. And so when I read a poem, I always make a little quick list of the images, various images, whether they're concrete or abstract. And I just see if any of those images play into the other elements of the poem in any sort of way, any of these other levels. Do the images have any significance towards that? Um, Moving on, we're offering some tropes here. These are figures of speech that present to our senses and appeal to our inner emotions. We just sort of have about five here that you could use. The first one is descriptive trope. That is a representation of a person, object, or a scene heightened by language. So it's a representation through description. The second is similetic, using like or as similes or analogies throughout. It's like this, it's like this, it's like this. The poet is sort of branching off, making all these little similes here and there. That could be a trope in a poem. There's the metaphorical, and when you usually see a metaphorical trope in poems, it's extended across the entire length of a work, such as an allegory or symbolism, extended metaphors, usually from start to finish. Doesn't have to be, but of course, metaphors are those comparisons that don't use like or as. Next up is rhetorical. That's any non-metaphorical or similetic figures of speech, such as irony or satire. And lastly, we sort of have a catch-all term to the various traditions that poetry has. So there's just schools of thought throughout time that have formed their own unique methods, whether it be impressionist or surrealist, poets that focused on archetypal qualities, the really cool poets, I can almost say that, Uolipo poets that made their various constraints. Just any traditional school of thought that has their own rules. We lump under traditional there. Let's see, a couple other things to touch on. We have an emotional resonance in this category. That is when the speaker of the poem has a feeling, and by reading the poem, you also have that feeling. It resonates to you. It bleeds off the page onto your heart. That's emotional resonance. What feelings do you both feel, right? Verbal texture, that's comparing the implied meanings of the words in the poem against their literal ones. So what is being implied and what is literally being said? I think I'm saying that right. And is that right, Mary? Verbal texture? She's saying yes. Okay, I nailed it. And lastly, point of view. Who is the speaker of the poem? Who is speaking? Often the speaker of the poem and the author are two different people. The author has made a speaker for the poem. And along with that, not only who is speaking, but why are they speaking? What has called them into speaking? This is all sort of lumped under the point of view. We're just trying to get into the speaker's vantage point. My eyes tell me that I've covered everything in that section. So I'll toss it back to Mary and stop sharing my screen.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, that what you mentioned about the eye reminded me of that little link I sent about the stylistic elements of Emily Dickinson's poetry discuss in an interesting way that she would stress that the eye is not necessarily her. So the lyric eye being separate from the poet, which is also like um, interesting and important, I think, in her poems especially. Okay, so for the last section, this one is the, we are at the ideational level, so the subject of words. So again, mentioning just that these bullet points, not comprehensive, just kind of giving us touching stones for these sections. So syntax, grammar, and schemas, diction, voice, and theme, and then this whole wide open window of like context. So again, I'm going to use my slides here just to give some visual guidance. So, yeah, this is referring to artifices of thought, metrics, sonics, and tropes, but that every element of language is a form itself, letters, syllables, words, etc. And then just some kind of basic definition that grammar, when we talk about grammar, we're referring to the rules of language. And so the ideational levels deal with the subject of words in these areas like the grammar and syntax. So I should mention, like, some of this more granular stuff comes from some of the textbooks that my instructors were recommending. This one's from Louise Turco's A New Book on Forms, and they seem like, when would I really need to use this? But for me, it just helps to know where it even falls. So if you don't know like what exactly these how these schemas apply, or not even being able to point them out in a poem, I think it still helps to know that this deals with the ideational level of a poem, what it actually means. So like there are different types where you have like orthographical, constructional, inclusive, exclusive, substitutive, and repetitive. Again, like more specific stuff that you could spend a lot of time on, but this is to give us a sense of where it falls in the big picture. And this is like a term that's very important. Just what we're talking about when we say syntax, the word order. And so then again, this is like where it gets you can like drill down into these specifics, types of syntax that exist. Egopoetic, narrative, dramatic, abstract, and those get very, very specific as you go through them. And like syntax, diction is, I think, one of the more common kind of like nuts and bolts things you'll talk about. So you can go, all right, on the ideational level of a poem, syntax and diction are important key elements. And the diction is the manner in which anything is expressed, like word choice, selection of words and phrasing, the type of phrasing and verbal style. And for Dickinson, that is a really important element because, as many of you know, she would have alternate diction, like alternate options with poems in case you want to like switch it and have a different effect. So diction is certainly like a key factor when you're looking at a poem. Like what level is the diction at? Is it very specified, or is it kind of like a more formal, or is it very, like earthy? So the diction is a key into what like is behind a poem, which leads into voice, an expression denoting the comprehensive style. And that also like ties in with what kind of attitude the speaker has in the poem. And then the theme is just the central idea. Like if you had to paraphrase what a poem is about, or what you feel is the heart of it, that could be a theme. And these things are helpful if you're in a workshop and just do not know what to say and you're just kind of lost, or even if you really love a poem and you don't know where to begin, to just say like, all right, well, this seems to be the theme. It's talking about, night in the forest, or whatever the theme is. You can just start somewhere with some of these key things. And then the last part, as I mentioned, is kind of this wide open window where we're talking about context. So while this is the beauty of objectivity, meaning you can, the goal is to look at a poem and not ask, like, is it good or bad, or even anything beyond that, but what is it doing? So you can literally just say, here's what I see that's actually happening in terms of the formal craft elements. But as the last part of this like table we came up with, this big wide open door is the context. So these are the historical, political, and sociocultural contexts that can affect its meaning. So like what events led to the poem's creation? Is the poem dependent on a certain context, or does it separate itself from all context? And so, yeah, like those are the levels, and then how it looks, how it sounds, how it feels, and what it means is really what we're talking about. So typographical is how it looks. How it sounds are the two sonic levels. How it feels is the sensory level. And then what it means is the ideational level. And I can say that that really came in handy a lot for me in a lot of workshops, just not knowing where to begin with poems. So I would have this up just when we were workshopping stuff. So I could say like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, here's what I'm seeing. So I know that we went over a little on that section. So I'll jump right into our next portion, which is we're going to look at this Dickinson poem. And we're going to look at 2 Dickinson poems and then a contemporary poem. And of course, any questions or anything that people have, feel free to add them. So I'll read this and then maybe we can just talk about what we're seeing. Okay, so this is Emily Dickinson, poem 448. And I'll note that I'm getting this from the R.W. Franklin edition, which is which has her original punctuation, because if you Google sometimes a Dickinson poem like this, you'll find it edited in a way that is not reflective of the way she originally wrote it. All right, Emily Dickinson, 448. I died for beauty, but was scarce adjusted in the tomb when one who died for truth was lain in an adjoining room. He questioned softly why I failed. For beauty, I replied, and I for truth. Themself are one. We brethren are, he said. And so, as kinsmen met a night, we talked between the rooms until the moss had reached our lips and covered up our names. All right, so we can, let's see, I guess I'll leave my screen up and then like I can just jump in by saying, okay, if I were in class again and I was looking at the typographical level, I'm going to say, what is the form here? And so we're looking at 3 stanzas of quatrains. And when you go to your terms of definition list and quick look up what's a quatrain, you'll see that it's a 4-line stanza. So some of this, like a lot of you may know and be using, and this is not like interesting or new, but I do think like knowing how to break it all down can really give you a scaffolding for like, say, maybe a more complex poem, or just if you are just beginning to see like, what am I seeing in terms of the typographical, and then verse paragraphs, that's like referring to the stanza, of course. And so, yeah, Lucas, feel free if you want to add anything too.
Yeah, I was just gonna jump in and say that you have to start with the basics if you want to get to the complex parts. You absolutely have to break it down like this if you want to get to a complex understanding. Um, I can start talking about the rhythm and meter here. If you know Emily Dickinson, this is in her common hymn meter, iambic hymn meter, 8/6/8/6, or alternating lines of iambic trimeter and tetrameter.
Yeah, and I was just going to like go to this. I know I keep talking about this, but I just think it's so helpful because it talks about her meter here. This really gives you like a breakdown of the common meter, just what you said, alternating 8/6/8/6, and refers us to the song Amazing Grace. So if you know that, you can see how this how this rhythm is reflected, like in real time in the poem. Um, and so then, yeah, then I would say, all right, sense of sound, we can think about alliteration, we can think about rhyme and the music of the poem. So of course you have room and tune. The music, I think, happens in the enjambment, in the kind of alteration of long lines and shorter lines. Um, I remember we had talked about, Lucas and I, we were saying there might be like some slant rhyme happening. And I know with Dickinson, it's always kind of there, maybe submerged, like room and names sort of can be considered slant rhyme. So just thinking about those like sonic levels as well.
Yeah. There's that slant rhyme in this poem too between adjusted and adjoining in the first stanza.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
which are two words that really stand out. Uh, this is a speaker who's getting adjusted to being dead.
Right.
Right?
And it made me want to jump into like syntax. Like you don't have to go in order with this either. Like that immediately made me think adjusted is such a strange word. And we had talked about
Yes.
that a bit where it's almost like clinical or something. But it gives you a sense of, I don't know, this precariousness that's in the poem. But then like on the sonic level, you have that repetition. So you can find ways to talk about it that way. And then in terms of the figurative language, I think we forgot to add that tenor and vehicle is what is being described and then how it's being described. So the tenor is like the item you want to talk about, and the vehicle is like the image you choose to talk about it with. Um, so all of these sensory and associative elements in this poem, I think are very subtle, but so impactful. Like this is my favorite Dickinson poem. And I think there is like this, there's a build up to the sensory effect in the last image being the moss that covers the speaker's names and their mouths. I just think that that is such a sensory and figurative it's such a stunning sensory and figurative image that happens there that obliteration of the self and the obliteration of kind of our own identities that isn't really reflected as strongly in the first two stanzas. There aren't tons of figurative or sensory or associative elements happening. You get the sense of isolation in rooms, but by the time the moss comes up at the end of the poem, I think that she's created enough sparseness that it's an intense ending that's very poignant and quite haunting, of course, too. And that can certainly lead into like the ideational level. So like if someone just said, well, what does this poem mean? And we would all have a different, you know, takeaway or an impression of what we think it means and what we get from it. But if you want to say we're approaching this objectively, you can just point out things like we said, the diction and what level of word choice she's using, which is sort of an interesting and unusual mix of word choice. Like I pointed out, adjusted, and then even we met a night. That's sort of like an archaic way to say that we met at night, or just sort of the language that she's juxtaposing with less formal language creates this sort of unknowableness to who's speaking and what exactly it is that they know. And then, of course, there are the contexts where, while Dickinson pointed out she didn't want to be considered the I think that I certainly read this with the impression that she wrote about death just in a way that no one else did. And there's a really nice documentary on like YouTube that's from the 90s, that's Voices and Visions, that's about Dickinson. And someone says in that documentary that she wrote like she knew what it meant to be dead, what it was like to be dead. She wrote like she knew what that was like. And I always think about that. And it seems very accurate to describe like the vision with which she saw this. It's very simple and sparse, but you get this like clarity of vision that is unsettling, but in a beautiful way. Um,
Evelyn Archer had a good comment. She said that the stanzas here seem to function a bit like a three-act play. And absolutely it does. We have the introduction to a dialogue scene. We have the dialogue scene in it of itself. We see the characters talking to each other. And then we sort of watch that dwindle off as the moss covers up their names. It's very symmetrical in that sense. And the dialogue is subversive. We get in that second stanza, he questions softly why I failed. Then the speaker of the poem answers the other person, but really says the answer to themselves because they died for beauty. And since it's a play on words, we're equating beauty with truth. The answer to themselves is really the answer to the other person. It's a subversive twist of dialogue that also adds a little flair there. Um, does anybody know who Emily Dickinson is referencing in this poem? She's making a reference between equating beauty and truth together. Keats. Everyone got it. Sorry.
nice. No,
Yes.
that was such a key discovery. And I truly have loved this poem for so long and just took it at face value. So that's an example of the context opening up this whole world at the end of like how we look at a poem, where you don't need to know that to find this poem absolutely gorgeous. But when you do, it's like now it has this whole other context. And now you can picture this conversation where it's almost like she's speaking to Keats, but then I also saw it as truth is embodied as the speaker, or beauty is embodied as the speaker, and the speaker is speaking to truth, who is, symbolically embodied as this other person, walled off in the separate part of like the underworld. So there's like all these sorts of fascinating layers that can happen afterward. So how about I don't know if I'll stop screen sharing, Lucas, and maybe we can do the next Dickinson poem.
Oh yeah, you want to move on?
Unless we had more to add.
Let me think. Is there more to add? There might be a little something. Let's see. Um, the one other thing I would add is that she is making that reference to Keats, but she's not just restating his idea. His line from Ode to a Grecian Herb is beauty is truth, truth beauty. That is all you need to know on earth and all no. Beauty is truth, truth beauty. That is all ye know on earth and all ye need to know. That's what she's referencing. And she's not simply just restating what he says. In this poem, we have the dialogue scene with beauty and truth in two separate rooms. And so what she's showing there is there's this wall between concepts. Like, yes, we can agree that beauty and truth are equivalent, but we still have to make the bridge between the concepts between the two. And there's just an unfathomable mystery to that we can sit there and look at this poem and say, how is it when I look at something, I know, if it's beautiful, it's true. How do I know if I hear something that's true, that it's also beautiful? You can sit there and wonder about that all day. And I just find this poem to be a representation of that mystery, which we'll never get to the bottom of. So that's what I'll end with.
Sounds good. And also that the dashes are bridging all of those ideas in this very unique way. That's, of course, characteristic of her other poetry, but I love to think of the dashes as bridging ideas. Okay, so I'll stop my screen share if you want to jump to the next one.
Yeah, I'll pull it up here. 1 sec. Hold on. I'm seeing if I can. Uh, that's not what I want to do. Okay, there we go. Sorry about that. I brought in this poem by Emily Dickinson. I started early, took my dog. Um, I've been sitting with this poem for many years since I took my first Emily Dickinson class in undergrad, and this poem still gives me problems. So I brought it to 100 people to hopefully talk about. Um, I'll give it a read through here, and then we can start ripping it apart together. I started early, took my dog, and visited the sea. The mermaids in the basement came out to look at me, and frigates in the upper floor extended hempen hands, presuming me to be a mouse aground upon the sands. But no man moved me till the tide went past my simple shoe and past my apron and my belt and past my bodice too, and made as he would eat me up, as wholly as a dew upon a dandelion sleeve. And then I started too, and he followed close behind. I felt his silver heel upon my ankle. Then my shoes would overflow with pearl until we met the solid town. No one he seemed to know, and bowing with a mighty look at me, the sea withdrew. So, starting out here, the typographical, we have 6 quatrain stanzas. We're in the same meter as the poem we just read. We're in hymn meter, 8/6, 8/6, iambic, trimeter, and tetrameter. And we have a lyric poem here about a speaker visiting the sea. There are rhymes on the 2nd and 4th line of most stanzas, except the last 2. We have alliteration of hempen hands, me mouse, man moved me, do dandelion. There's an internal rhyme of took and look. And we also have three main metaphors that sort of keep this poem grounded. We start out, first of all, with comparing the sea to a house. The mermaids in the basement came out to look at it. And frigates are ships in the upper floor of the house. So you have the bottom of the sea and sort of the upper floors of the house. She imagines the sea as a house. And that's important because we end with houses at the end of the poem. We go back to the solid town, to the buildings. So we're meant to sort of compare and contrast here. We have a house of the sea and a house of the land. One's fluid, one's stable. We have a couple more metaphors here, though. The sea ends up being personified as a man that sort of overwhelms the speaker of this poem. Went past my simple shoe, past my apron, my belt, my bodice too. And this man follows the speaker up to the town. That's a metaphor. And the other metaphor I want to point out is that she says that the sea, the sea, could eat her up wholly as dew on a dandelion sleeve. And that one strikes me because dew on a dandelion's sleeve is a comforting image and metaphor for what she's talking about, which is being basically drowned in water. So there's a subversive twist to her pointing that out. It seems like she's almost comforted by being overwhelmed by this sea that she goes and visits. I'm sort of rattling on about the metaphors a little bit, and that's usually because when you start using this poetry table and you start breaking things down, you'll usually find one thing that really clicks. And for me, when I read this poem, it's the 3 metaphors: the sea as a house, the sea as a man, and the dew as a dandelion that really drive this poem. home for me. Because injunction, what I've said every so far is that these three metaphors reflect the fluidity and shape-shifting nature of the sea. And like the tide, the speaker sort of comes down, goes back, and explores this relationship between form and formlessness and stability and fluidity. And you could apply this to the sublime. You could apply it to the divine if you believe in it. You could apply it to beauty. You could apply it to the nature of association. Um, but that's mostly, I mean, just looking at it through a poetic table. Um, my main takeaways when I look at this. Uh, let's see, Mary, do you want to add anything?
Well, let's see. I know we have a bit more to move to, so I won't like stay too much longer on this, but on this one, but like I would say, I agree that I'm really drawn to the figurative language, so like the figurative level in this poem, especially, and the like sensory elements of the clothing really stick out to me, as significant. And so the image of the tide slowly creeping up past the shoe, past the apron, belt, and bodice, all capitalized, have this like very um signifying like of the speaker's personhood and their like identity being sort of slowly encroached upon and pursued and starting to be taken over. And then it seems that how towards the end of the poem you have this twist where the sea, it's like it can no longer move in that boundary, so it's following the speaker, and then the speaker's feeling the the step of this pursuer, and then when they meet the solid town, it's like he doesn't know anyone and must withdraw. So it's just the physical associative nature of the ebb and flow of the tide being compared to this very like kind of non-defined pursuit or struggle is so fascinating. And it's just, it resists like an easy read. You could like move to the last level of the poetry table and go and look into the historical context or biographical context of Dickinson, but so often her poems resist or don't, you can't confirm any kind of reading like that. They're just very strange. And so I really love the associative nature of the figurative language that doesn't define roles for this struggle, only that there is a struggle, that there is this tension that's just not exactly explained. Um, and then sort of this like ironic gesture at the end, or kind of like a witty gesture, which is also like a Dickinson style comment where, you know, the sea bows to her and then leaves. So it's just sort of like almost humorous and sort of unexpected at the end. So
Yeah. Let one quick thing. I really like what Erica is saying in the comment about the dew and the dandelion. Uh, that there's another layer of meaning um between a dandelion consuming a piece of dew and an ocean taking someone. I completely agree. And there's people pointing out the double meaning of dandy and lion, sort of pointing to a divine power.
yeah,
Um,
we had talked about like the kind of the etymology of dandelion and like the tooth of the lion, where I get a very strong sense of like a resilience in the speaker and sort of like a, I don't know, like a self-protective mode, or like a fierceness that's concealed or sort of in play with some other force in this poem.
the only thing I want to mention before we move on, because I know we're limited on time, Mary, is this is my only question with this poem, and I'll leave you with it. I I don't know what the significance of the dog is yet. Why does she take the dog to the sea? Why does that dog never come back in the
And in
poem?
the first line, yeah,
Yeah. What happens to that dog? That's all I want to know. Um, then we can move on.
we'll have to review the comments for people's
Yes.
thoughts. Okay,
Yes.
so yeah, like what we have one other poem we wanted to look at, and then like a prompt and maybe share, but we'll see like just what works for time. So did I share yet? No. Oops. Okay, so yeah, our last poem we're going to look at is just a contemporary example. And again, we just don't have time to give these poems the actual reading that they deserve and the time and discussion that they deserve, but this is to just illustrate how this can work for any kind of poem you want to approach. And I just picked this one because it's just like so gorgeous. And this is from Louise Glick's last book, Winter Recipes from the Collective. It's really one of her just most outstanding works. And this is the last poem in that book. It's called Song. So I'll read through this. Song. Leo Cruz makes the most beautiful white bowls. I think I must get some to you, but how is the question in these times? He's teaching me the names of the desert grasses. I have a book, since to see the grasses is impossible. Leo thinks the things man makes are more beautiful than what exists in nature, and I say no. And Leo says, wait and see. We make plans to walk the trails together. When, I ask him, when? Never again. That is what we do not say. He is teaching me to live in imagination. A cold wind blows as I cross the desert. I can see his house in the distance. Smoke is coming from the chimney. That is the kiln, I think. Only Leo makes porcelain in the desert. Ah, he says, you're dreaming again. And I say, then I'm glad I dream. The fire is still alive. Okay, so man, like with this one, okay, so you look at typographical and you can see that we're looking at all kinds of different line lengths. And I see this as a very kind of common form you'll see, it just looks like a lot of poems you'll come across. And of course, that's like where Glick is just such a master because it doesn't look like it's going to shock you and then it does. So we're just looking at varying stanzas. You've got like monostichs, you've got couplets, tercets. So just on a typographical level, it's doing specific things. Let me grab the poetry table up. Lucas, any thoughts you have while I'm doing that?
Um, what strikes me just first off about this is that she's she's sort of having a conversation here, but Leo, I'm assuming that she's not actually talking to a person. It's more of like a metaphorical conversation that she's sort of having in her aesthetic practice, um, which gives the poem sort of a level of intimacy because yeah, she's trying to work this out for herself. She's sort of conversing with a trusted source that she believes the most, it's this person that makes the most beautiful white bowls. And so you go to the master who makes the beautiful thing and try to learn from them. And I think that's a great occasion that the speaker has to like start talking about this poem.
Yeah, and the sound that we're dealing with is it's like lyrically conversational almost, where we're listening to beautifully constructed sentences, yet the way the lines are jammed and the way the stanzas are arranged, it has this balance between being lyrical and poetic and beautiful, and also very plain and kind of just earthy and straightforward. And I think that that works without like drawing a lot of attention to the poetic devices. Because I also meant to mention with this whole poetry table concept that this is really for like applying to afterwards. So you would let this poem come out as it is going to come out, and then you would kind of take the poetry table. Like I don't think I would recommend or want anyone to think about that while they're trying to generate. You certainly could try it. But I think it's nice to look at this poem and say like, what is it doing? Like, or what did it achieve really? It's like what we're saying. So I just see it as achieving um, these very subtle these very specific and subtle things without drawing a lot of attention, without using like kind of obvious rhetorical tropes or different things that you would find.
Yeah,
The
and
rhyme includes that, yeah.
Liz pointed out in the chat that this poem's doing a lot more telling instead of showing. If you're familiar with those concepts, right? Telling is like the classic, um, what you're often told not to do, and yet you always have to tell a little bit, right? So I think even like looking at that, like what this poem is telling a lot, but how is that maybe working for it in its own way is a question I would have for it. Yeah.
Yeah, I would point to the context for me because like being the last poem in her last book, I just think there's your context. Like she's talking about like what she has come to, like the states of expression that she's come to and what her creativity feels like kind of drawn out as a landscape. So like I agree that it's not tons of illustrating and not even a ton of figurative language, yet
Hmm.
there are these like very weighted ideas that are really expansive. And I like what you said. I agree that there's like this intimacy in the conversation that it's kind of letting the speaker
Yeah.
discover this as they're uttering it.
Right. And sort of this uh seeing the art almost as something that comes from the desert, a beautiful thing that you find in the desert, almost like a mirage, maybe more than a mirage. That too.
Yeah, and then glass being made from sand so that it's almost this person is able to sculpt this landscape into something that she believes will like endure. And like the final couplet, of course, I'm so glad I dreamed the fire is still alive, just like rebounds on all that. And I think stands in for the creative process and what that means for the specific speaker.
Yeah.
Yeah, so let's see. For our prompt, I don't know the best way to do it. I guess I could maybe just put it in the chat because we just thought we would next do a prompt. Maybe spend like since we only have 20 or so minutes, maybe we'll just spend like 5 minutes or something. Just jot some ideas to start a poem in response to the prompt. And then like the idea would be that you then take the poetry table and apply it and see how you would describe what you just wrote. Um, yeah, even though we said like don't keep it in mind when you're generating, but this would just be for kind of illustrative purposes. So I'll stop my sharing and then I'll read this aloud, but I'll just put it in the chat as well. So our prompt is write a poem about a haunting encounter in nature. Use couplets, which are two-line stanzas, as your form. Include provocative or interesting enjambment and slant rhymes. So that's, of course, very specific, and you don't have to adhere to that. But sometimes, as some of you may know, like having those restrictions can give you some nice boundaries that make things come out that maybe would not have emerged otherwise. Um, and I think we did not talk about, we might have skipped over enjambment a little, but just like break up the lines in an interesting way is what we're saying there. And then the slant rhymes is kind of just a nod toward Dickinson, like try to include some of that attention to what sounds like a rhyme but isn't quite, that kind of skirts the precise definition of rhyming. So maybe we'll take like 5 minutes for everyone. Does that sound good? Okay. as you can see, I put the prompt up on my screen just so we have it in front of us. So I'd say about 2 more minutes and then we'll reconvene. Okay, so I know that wasn't a lot of time to compose a haunting encounter in nature poem, but you know, maybe you got something. So let's see. I don't know. Oh, I see in the chat people have added some things. So yeah, from here we can do whatever seems best. If we want to look at some examples in the chat or people have thoughts about the process, whatever we want to do.
There's also some Q&A questions people want us to answer.
Yeah.
Did you
Okay.
see that tab there?
Yes, thank you. There are questions there. Yeah, so let's see. I appreciate that people included their what the poems they came up with in the chat. That's awesome. Oh, and then you didn't mean to share, but that's still cool. Thank you.
We love it.
Yeah, because as you may know too, in workshops, it's like a lot of times there's just a lot of silence when it comes time to share. If someone
Yeah, no.
like,
You should feel comfortable with sharing, always sharing your work, putting it out there. If you don't put it out there, no one will ever read it.
um, and so, yeah, I guess like just in terms of that exercise, it can be interesting to see how, say, the constraints of the topic, the content, like haunting encounter in nature, couplets, slant rhyme, how that influenced your view of, approaching it with these levels. Like, what did you come up with typographically? Was it free verse instead of the couplets? Did you find the couplets too constraining, or did you find that it helped you like create two ideas that play off of each other? Because sometimes couplets can do that. In terms of like the sonics, did you find it hard to draw out slant rhymes? Because I think those are kind of like that's a subtle skill that you can't often just pull out of the air. They sort of happen when you sit with language for a while and sort of meld it together with your content. Um, you could look at your figurative language. I think a lot of us start from the sensory. Um, I know I'm always drawn to like the sensory and associative elements of a poem and how those represent the experience of what's happening. And then you could like look at this context in the end and say, this was written on the fly for a virtual workshop. And so how did that sort of influence what you're able to generate? Or even knowing that you were then going to apply the table, I guess that could also influence how you generate it. So I was just looking at some of the other stuff, the questions, but yeah, Lucas, if you have thoughts to add about that process or anything, feel free.
Which process?
Like just about the prompt and how that can help illustrate what we want the poetry table to do.
Sure, sure. Well, already, if you look in the comments over here about what some people have submitted, you can see that people sort of went totally different ways. Bonnie has a very has very short lines, which gives the poem a sort of staccato feel to it. Um, Maggie put in some longer, just a couplet that was longer than that. And you can just see such a wide variety in all these and how that you would need to apply very specific concepts from the table to be able to identify the differences between all of these. Um, Whoa, I'm seeing more now.
Yeah, and I love Howard Burroughs. The first couplet, I saw a stump, it was a bear. That's fantastic. And I
That's
think
really
like the
good.
like the lack of punctuation there is so interesting too, and just is Dickinsonian in that sense. Um, because I could see it with like dashes as well, but that's like such a synthesis of all this stuff. Like it's um visual, it's a interesting image, but then it has sort of this like wit, and then it has the interesting like syntax and diction that's just sort of a very straightforward diction.
Wow, they're popping off.
Yeah, this is cool. Yeah, so if anyone has thoughts on trying to now take this idea and apply it to your own stuff, if that resonates or if there are parts that don't seem to apply, I'd just be curious. Like I guess with the constraints, you'll know certain things right off the bat. Like we'll know that we're likely dealing with the couplets. And as I said, those other contextual things. I think where it can maybe veer off into interesting ways are the figurative language and then the sound, because we each have our own specific approach to like those two sonic levels, either writing, most of us are, I would presume, are writing unmetered, and then how we choose to use sound, I think is always an individualized thing. And also not hearing these aloud, like having them just written in this chat, and I presume that maybe you didn't get to read them aloud yet because that influences the sense of what things sound like too. You might want to change or have a different feeling about what you put together based on how it sounds when you've actually read it. Yeah, like listening and missing in Kate's piece, great examples of slant rhymes.
Hmm.
Yeah, so let me look at, I'll address some of these questions maybe while we're still kind of,
Yeah, the Q&A.
yeah, using the prompt.
Sure.
Okay,
Which one do you want to do first?
let's see. Okay, well, I'll start with the one I see at the top about submitting poetry for publication in a zine, where the presumption is up to the publisher and editors. Is it a safe assumption that they will recognize how the form in which the original work was intended to be presented? Is there ever a risk of your form being changed from submission to publication? I mean, the last part of that question, I don't think so. I think that an editor will look at the form as, inherently what they're drawn to about a poem. I guess I can say that I've had poems rejected many, many times. And then once I changed the form, then I got an acceptance. So that could be like evidence that I didn't have the form nailed down yet. Um, and like I know we talked about sharing some like resources and stuff, but just one I can give off the top of my head is Eduardo Corral has really excellent craft talks on YouTube. And in one of them, Eduardo C. Corral is the poet I mentioned. And in one of them, he talks about form being containers so that when you write a poem, you can try pouring it into different containers to see what happens. And that's part of this really like extensive revision process he also has, where he breaks down his poems by sentence and just literally writes them out to make sure each sentence is like doing what he wants and that they're strong and powerful. And then, or whatever he wants them to be doing, and then tries pouring them into different forms, which I think is really neat. And our instructor, Larissa Spurluck at BGSU, would talk about something she called the tercet machine, where if you have a poem that you're just struggling with the form, to run it through the tercet machine, meaning just put it into three-line tercets, because she really believed that form does something just like interesting. It creates a sense of unbalance because you're talking about three-line stanzas. You don't have that unity that like couplets have. It just moves the like balance of the poem off, and it can help you see what it is you're doing or what you want to be doing. So that's not really helpful for the first part of this question, but that's what came to mind.
Yes, of course. And the tercet suggestion, of course, comes from Sylvia Plath's Sheep and Fog, which is written in tercets, and you can sort of track how that poem was made um, to see how that exercise works.
Right, and Ted
Uh,
Hughes has some great thoughts. There's like an essay where he analyzes what she did and how that moves through revisions. It's really fascinating. I'd recommend
yes,
that too. Um, so
you
is it a safe
got
assumption that they're gonna I think yes. I think it's a safe assumption that they'll understand what it is you were going for. And if
yeah,
it's not fitting what they need for the journal, they'll like, like in a tiered rejection, they may tell you it came close, but not quite there. A lot of times that can have to do with form, where maybe they love the content or something, but it just, I think it speaks to revision. Revising it until someone just wants to snap it up, I think is like how it goes.
yes. Sometimes just handwriting it about 20 to 40 times over will do it.
I have not tried that. That's a
It
good
does work.
suggestion.
As long as you keep changing it every
Yeah.
time. Somebody asked why stepping's undersonic. The
Mm.
only reason stepping is undersonic is because I just wanted to include a couple things you could look for if you're looking at a free verse poem. If you're looking at free verse, you're going to be looking at enjambment, line breaks, stepping maybe. Um, that's the only reason we included it there, just in case you're looking at free verse.
Yeah, and as I had mentioned, like this is really our thoughts on how this all fits together. This is not any kind of like what's the word? No one signed off on this except us. This is how we see
Yeah.
this. So we had like other, like we had some other things that we kept moving around, like this should really be under here. So it's certainly malleable, I think. There's some flexibility in how you view this.
Yeah, if you don't like it, just copy paste it somewhere else. Make it your own.
Yeah, right. I think it's true. I think that that's like and I will probably keep changing it, like as time goes
Yeah,
on. Because it's
yeah.
just a culmination of stuff from everywhere. So like I know we're very close to the end here, but I will look at this question about meter. And this one's interesting because like how do you see the importance of meter in today's age of free verse? Is it something you consciously focus on, or does it happen subconsciously? I will say, I guess, trying to be concise is that I think it's so important to learn about, even though contemporary poets aren't necessarily doing it. I think that it will change how you approach language and it will just give you knowledge that will keep coming up again and again. Like it reminds me of kind of just being knowledgeable about some of the like classics in literature, even if you don't read them every day or you don't use them all the time. Like when someone refers to something, it's frustrating to not know what they're talking about. And that's what I found in like the MFA program, that I just was frustrated that I didn't have that background. So to me, it was important to just know the nuts and bolts of the craft, even if it's not how I write. I want to know like the foundation that what I'm doing is based on.
Yeah. Do we plan to publish our handouts? Not really.
No, but like I don't know if maybe Brooke can weigh in on we can provide like follow-up resources or something. Like I'm happy to do that. Cause yeah, this was all stuff I put together for teaching undergrad a creative writing workshop for undergrads, which was a really interesting process, of course. And a lot of it had to do with me just figuring out how I see the whole process and how I wanted to lay it out. So I put this together, trying to get my thoughts in order so that I could then share them with people. So they're out there anyway, so we can see about
Yeah.
maybe sharing additional resources.
Yeah, we will we'll follow up together, Mary and Lucas, and we'll figure out what more of today's presentation you'd like to be able to share with folks. The PowerPoint, sorry, the two PDFs will continue to live on the event page for a while, and we will be sharing the recording from this program on the museum's YouTube page, so you can revisit it. Another thing that I would suggest, because this chat is just absolutely fire. It's full of great information, people sharing links and ideas. So right now, if you pull up the chat bar on your side and you go to the three dots on the right at the bottom, that's where you can save the chat and have that for yourself as a record of this evening, including the really beautiful poems that you all were writing. What an incredible group of writers and poets here. And thank you, Mary and Lucas, for such an enlightening and energizing evening. I was saying to these poets before we started that I just feel like this is the perfect session to kick off our festival week here, here on the Tuesday of the week, because you've given us so many resources that we can continue to apply across the rest of the week. So a big thank you to all of these participants and to Mary Robles and Lucas Clark. And remember that the festival continues now through Sunday. So we're going to be bringing you much more poetry and fun. And we would just love to have you there at other events. In about 1 hour, there will be a virtual workshop entitled Putting the Wit in Witness, Bringing Levity to Heavy Topics. So that's beginning at 6 p.m. and it features Amy Whitmore and Jung Hae Che. Coming up tomorrow, the Emily Dickinson Poetry Marathon continues, and there will be a workshop on epistolary writing with author Sylvie Cathrall, a workshop on blackout poetry, a panel on poetry and psychoanalysis with Dana Levin and Ayelet Amate, and just so many more amazing things to come. Just as a reminder, the museum presents these programs for free, and we can't do it without your support. So you're going to hear this request a lot this week, but if you can support the festival, making a donation, we really appreciate it. And you can head to our website to do that or find out more about what we do. So we thank you all for being here, and thank you, Mary and Lucas.
Thank you all so much, and thank you, Brooke, and also everyone. You have to visit the house if you haven't, because it's just an experience. It's just beautiful. The Emily Dickinson House.
Yes, please come visit us, all of you. Let's have a party. Let's have a poetry party.
Yep, there's a garden, there are cats. It's awesome.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your evening. Bye-bye.